So we want to transition a little bit and get into some really practical things when it comes to this idea of one-to-one mentoring, this friendship with a purpose. So one of the things that you need to be considering is who might be looking for a mentor. And I think there's a couple parts of that question that are really important to consider. The first is the who. You can't just gloss over that part. You really have to ask, well, who is it? What is the context? And if you turn to page 7, this is kind of where we are in your book. The who could be any number of different segments of the single-parent community. It might be a young new single mom. It might be the teenager of a mom. One of the families that we're working with at the Restoration House is a 35-year-old mom with 7 kids. Well, that looks very different than a 19-year-old mom with a new child with 1, correct? And so you really have to ask yourself, well, who is it? And who is it that we're mentoring? And depending on the model that you're using, if it's specifically one-to-one friendship with a purpose kind of mentoring with children, then maybe it's not as intentional with the mother, and maybe it's really about that kid. And so then you're asking, well, at what age would they be really receptive to mentoring? You probably wouldn't be mentoring a 2-year-old, right? And so there's all these kinds of things that you need to be considering when you're thinking about the who. The other thing that I think is really critical with this question is the idea of looking for. You really can't do mentoring well with somebody who doesn't want it. If you haven't heard that yet, I want to say that again. You really can't do mentoring well with somebody who doesn't want it. And if you try, it often ends up stripping dignity from the mentee. It really starts impacting their view of their image of what God intended them to be, because you end up putting something and reflecting something on them that they're not asking for. And so that's a really important thing to be looking at. One of the things I'm going to stop for just a second, and Heidi didn't really introduce herself. And so for people who maybe are brand new to this session, I want you guys to know that even though Mandy and I are helping to deliver some of this, Heidi's really the architect of this curriculum. And so she's got a wonderful brain, and she's also very good at looking at best practices and all this kind of stuff. So what you're getting tonight isn't stuff that we just kind of sat around a coffee table and kind of came up with on our own. It's really things that Heidi's kind of scoured all over to really bring the best of what she can find to you all. So be thinking about that, the who, really who is it and what's the context, and also asking the question, are they really looking for this? One of the things that we do at the Restoration House is to help kind of test that out, and this is something I would encourage you all to do if you end up doing formal programs for mentoring, is also doing training for the mentee before they're ever accepted into that relationship or in that program. We often think about training mentors. I think very rarely do we think about training mentees. And so there needs to be this training/orientation for the mentee to really understand, what is this relationship about? It's going to be a lot of the things that we discuss here in a few minutes, but from the mentee's perspective. So that way everybody in the relationship has the same expectation, right? Because you don't want a mentor coming in with one set of expectations because they've been trained, and a mentee kind of coming in with very different expectations because they haven't, right? Because what you're going to end up doing is kind of creating some conflict there that maybe doesn't need to be there. So we're going to move now into the things that I think you probably most want out of this kind of training, and that is, what can we do and what can we not do? Everybody wants to get really practical, right? You want to answer those two questions. Tell me what to do and tell me what not to do, right? And so we're gonna get into some of that, kind of what the mentoring role includes, what it doesn't include, what are some of the qualities, what are some things that you better not be doing if we're watching your program, and things like that. First is, what are some of the things that this mentoring role could include? And one of them is this idea, really simply, of conversation. And one of the things about conversation is two-way. Is that correct? And so if you ever find yourself in a conversation but you never hear anything back, you might want to ask yourself, how much am I talking? Have I shut up yet? Should I be quiet for a minute? Sometimes we don't do that because Maybe in the beginning of the relationship, we don't feel like there's enough space to be quiet together. And so we feel like we need to talk a lot to kind of fill the space, right? But also make those conversations appropriate for where you are in the relationship. You know, the conversation between a mentor-mentee in the beginning should look very different than conversations you might be having a year or 2 years from now, right? And so don't try to jump the gun in the conversations and go really deep, really fast, because that's going to put people on edge. I'm not going to talk through all these different ones, but another one is just simply activities. Activities is a really important kind of consideration in the relationship, especially in the beginning. A lot of times it's easier to build relationships around activities when they're new, right? Men know this really well, right? We never have to talk. We can just go watch a football game together, never say 2 words, and we had the greatest time of our lives, and we feel like we're buddy-buddy, right? But in this mentor-mentee thing, it's really important to think, maybe in the beginning, if you're struggling with the conversation, think about having an activity first, something that you both like to do. And that's important. One of the moms that I've had the pleasure of knowing, a single mom, she was in this mentoring relationship, and she had about 7 mentors. It was a team thing. And she was saying, you know what, Daniel? I don't like doing any of the things my mentors do. And I said, well, how's that been handled? She's like, well, I haven't said anything yet. They like always ask me to do this weird stuff. And she said, you know what? I'm really boring. She said, what I love to do is I love to sit in the mall and watch people. And I was like, okay, just tell them that. And you know what? Her and her mentor started doing some of that really boring stuff, right? But there was an issue on both sides. The mentee wasn't willing to express her true desire, and the mentor wasn't willing to be quiet enough or ask enough questions to really learn about what they wanted to do, right? It was really about what they wanted to do. So when you think about activity, don't just do activity for activity's sake. Really be thinking about what are things that could be, again, mutually enriching, right, to both of you. Another really important consideration in terms of this role is celebrating. Celebration is so vital to relationship. One of the things that we talk about culturally in the work that I get to do is sharing the wins. You know, sometimes depending on your mentee and the situation that they're in, certain amounts of time might pass and you might be thinking, man, this thing is going nowhere. Or, man, look at all these things that have happened that have just been horrible. And what we have to stress to mentors that we work with all the time is if you don't put yourself in the habit of regularly celebrating the wins, oftentimes you look back over a span of time and you think nothing good happened. And the reality of it is that's probably not true. And so we're very intentional about celebrating even the small things. I mean, we don't put on a full-scale party, you know, for things, but we, in small ways, celebrate them when appropriate. Things like a mentee opening up to a mentor for the first time, really, right? Well, that's a thing to celebrate, and to celebrate with them and to acknowledge and say, you know what, Connie, man, for the first time, I really feel like we connected today. You know, did you feel that too? And being willing to celebrate those kinds of things, and not in a false kind of way, but in a really genuine, appropriate kind of way. Another one, which may kind of be just a given the context of where we're at right now, but it's kind of spiritual enrichment and development. One of the things that I think is important to consider is not really putting a lot of pressure on your mentees if they're not already involved to come to church. And I don't mean that you don't make the invitation open and things like that, but to get into this position where you're forcing can be detrimental to somebody's faith. And I'll tell you something, the best way to share faith is through relationships. And so don't forget in your role as a mentor, sharing your faith in really appropriate, God-honoring ways is a beautiful thing. And listening to and hearing their faith. Sometimes we get churches who ask our program, how many people have you saved? I always hate that question. One of the reasons is we're in the Bible Belt, y'all. And a lot of people would say, hey, I've already been saved. I'm not there to question that. What I can say to a lot of churches back is, you know what? I think we both travel deeper in our faith through the relationships we have. And that's what it's about. That's what I'm looking for in the relationships that I'm having with other people, is that we're going deeper in our faith. Not that new salvations aren't important and all that kind of stuff, but don't make that your barometer. You know what I mean? Be thinking about the depth of faith that you're experiencing together and walking in together. So some of you guys, depending on the way you're wired, is like itching for this next part. It's like, what do I not do? Right? You just know yourself too well, and you feel like, man, I've tripped up too many times. Just tell me what not to do, and I'll sit on my hands, right? And I won't do that anymore. So one really important thing is doing things for your mentor or mentee. One of the things that I love to say is I try to never do things to people, which most people are kind of, they get that. They're like, man, I'm not supposed to do something to somebody else, right? Like kick them, right? But we often forget that the for can be just as negative. That we also try not to do things for people that they can do for themselves. And so what I try to do and what I encourage other people to do is do things with people, right? It's not the to and not the for, it's the with. And the with is really reflective of the journey that you want in a mentoring relationship. It's about, hey, man, we're doing this thing together. This is about life together. And so it's doing things with. This is the soapbox thing that Mandy mentioned. Never, ever, 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 never, ever, 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 ever give money to your mentee. You just don't need to. I can assure you that anything that they need materially, there's another more creative way to do it than giving them money. Money confuses relationship. It also brings in weird power dynamics that you didn't even intend. It also sets up dependence that you don't want, okay? And it also, in the very core of who they are, strips dignity. It strips dignity. If you look back into the Old Testament and you start thinking about books like Ruth and the gleaning principle and all that kind of stuff, God intended for people to work. Work was never a part of the curse, okay? The toil in our work was a part of the curse, and the pain in childbearing, right, ladies? That was a part of the curse, okay? But let's not confuse it and think that work was a part of the curse, because work was not a part of the curse. And so it's not that you need to be their master in order for them to get, and they need to work for you, but you need to allow people to gain by their own effort, okay? And when we start doing things for or giving, especially money, all those things start getting hampered and hurt. Asking personal questions beyond the mentee's comfort zone. Again, you have to know where you are in the relationship. You know, don't go into the relationship in the beginning guns blazing, you know, because my guess is you're not willing to share that depth with them, right? And then sometimes that's a good gauge to think about, well, how far am I willing to go? And that may not be good depending on who you are. Some of you guys kind of like walk around, you know, like an open book, and you're just sharing it. I mean, don't even use that if that's who you are, okay? Let me give you a rule of thumb about what you can give to your mentee, okay? This is what I use with people that we train, is that if you would naturally do it for a friend, feel like you can do it for a mentee. Now, here's the trick in that. That's different for different people. I do not give gifts except for my immediate family, my wife and my kids. Ask anybody who knows me, you ain't getting a gift from this guy. I just don't do that. It's not the way I'm wired. So to think about, well, I'm in this relationship with this mentee and they don't have this, and so I'm going to go buy an Xbox for her kids. Well, that's not natural to who I am. And so I'm doing it for other reasons that probably are not all that pure. In the end, it probably has more to do about me than them. Okay? Now, but if you would naturally do it for a friend, feel like you can do it for them. So people often ask me, well, could I buy my mentee dinner? Hey, if you're the kind of person who every once in a while you're the one paying because that's just how you roll, do that. But if you never buy, don't feel obligated. Or maybe better yet, go to a place where they can afford to pay for their own, right? Or maybe buy you dinner. You see what I'm saying? Being kind of put in that mode of receiving. So that's a good rule of thumb, I think, is think about, well, what would I naturally do or be willing to do for a friend? Doing things with youth mentees without the parents' knowledge. To me, this is a really, really important one. Some of the models that I've seen of youth mentoring, I think, are really struggling in this area because it really makes the dynamics purely between the mentor and the mentee, the youth, the child. And I think that, again, strips dignity from the parent. I think whenever we're working with youth in mentee relationships, we need to be working through the parent as much as at all possible. And I know that's not always possible, but as much as possible, we need to be working through the parent. So, what are some things that a mentor is not, and what are some things that a mentor is? Some things like caseworker. I always like the example of a mentor is not a parent. There's this word about this idea of being paternalistic. Your mentees, including the kids, if you're menteeing kids, they don't need other parents. For better or worse, they have them. And they don't need a parent. What they need is a friend, somebody who's going to invest in them no matter what the circumstance, whether or not they listen to them or not, or all those different kind of parental things. They don't need a parent. They certainly don't need a babysitter. They don't need somebody who's kind of has that kind of watch over them. And they definitely don't need a Savior. They have one. His name is Jesus. And so let's not confuse what we're doing in these relationships. We're not there to be anybody's Savior. They need friends. They need coaches. They need, one of the ones I love is role model. Modeling is a huge thing in mentoring. So what are some ways that mentors make a difference, and what are some of the ways that they probably don't make a difference? Praying is huge in mentoring, really being authentic in prayer and being consistent in that. And as appropriate, be willing to pray with the mentee as that relationship develops. Another one is really asking critical kinds of questions that gets thought moving. Culturally, we've kind of, as a culture as a whole, we've kind of lost some of that ability, like how to think critically for ourselves. And the last thing you want to do in a mentor-mentee relationship is kind of go in with all the answers and say, I was really bad at this. I used to be, before what we do now at the Restoration House, I used to be on staff at Westtown Christian Church, and one of my roles on staff at church was I was in charge of local benevolence. And if you've ever worked with benevolence in the local American church, a lot of that is, hey, can you help me with my rent payment? Can you help me with my utility bill? All that different kind of stuff. And what I would find myself doing is in about 5 minutes, I would have all their answers. I would think about, okay, well, here's where you went wrong. Here's the decisions you shouldn't have made. If you only would have made that decision, your life would have turned out differently. And I would never be so arrogant to say that to them or not be willing to say that to them, but I would be thinking it, right? And that kind of thought is really harmful because all of a sudden you start putting what you intend for somebody's life on them instead of really considering what God intends for them. And this idea of asking really good, thought-provoking questions is a way to get at what God intends for somebody without you putting it on them, right? Encouraging, celebrating the small steps. I've kind of already talked about that a little bit. And another huge one is just being present. And depending on how you're wired, you're uncomfortable with that, right? Because you're thinking, man, I got to do something. I can't just be present. That's not who I am. I got to be talking, or I got to be acting, or I got to be giving, or something like that. But a huge thing sometimes is just to be present. I used to be a volunteer chaplain with the Sheriff's Department for 7 years. And the thing they pushed into us more than anything is this is a ministry of presence. It's a ministry of presence. That at the end of the day, when somebody goes through that really deep traumatic thing in their life, whatever that may be, maybe they lose a loved one, or maybe they lose a job, or maybe they feel like they just can't go on another day, oftentimes there are no words for those moments. And so maybe what you need to do is just be there. And to me, the beautiful things about mentoring is all too often the families that I've run into, the single-parent families that I've run into, is they've been told, hey, I need to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. Well, let me tell you something. There ain't nobody who's ever done that. Nobody's ever gotten to where they are today because somehow they made it on their own. Nobody. Those people are not always willing to admit that it took other people to get them to where they are. But let me tell you, the way God designed us, we never get anywhere by ourselves. Right? And so presence is huge. And for some people, they've lacked presence. They've lacked other people being present in their lives. And so that's a huge thing to be thinking through. So what are some of the things that don't impact these relationships or impact them negatively? Telling them exactly what to do, again, kind of being that answer book. And another one is giving up on them. So many of the families that you're going to work with in mentoring, they've had person after person give up on them. And what they don't need is another one. And so before you decide to jump in this journey of mentoring or getting your church to do it, really consider, man, are we willing to go the long haul here? Because if you're not, you're going to do more harm than good by jumping in and giving up. And actually, that's why the whole, if there's a family that you're connecting with who has a lot of felt need and a lot of depth of pain and a lot of intense struggle at this moment, that's why one-to-one mentoring is not the right approach. Because if it's just one, there's a high likelihood that one is going to give up, not necessarily because they couldn't have done it in a team. It's because there's this compassion fatigue, right? And so they can't operate anymore. It's like, man, I just cannot go another step with this person. And so in a team approach, you end up leaning on one another. And you're able, and at the end of the day, in a team approach, if one mentor, let's say, has to move to Florida tomorrow because that's just where life is taking them, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to restart the trust process and bring in another new mentor and all that kind of stuff. They've already got 6 or 7 other people that are still walking that journey. So again, asking that question of the who in the context is just really, really important to be considering as you're going through this. So how does mentoring have an impact? The foundation of friendship mentoring is this idea in Romans 8:11. Where Paul says, the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you. You all know this. You all know that Christ, to me, it's like one of the most unfathomable things that we can imagine is that God, the creator of the universe, takes up residence in us. And it should bring great comfort in knowing that, you know what, even in one-to-one mentoring, it's still a little bit of a team. You know what I'm saying? You still got God kind of out there before you and in front of you and kind of working through you. And so never think that you're at it alone. But it's also really important understanding that God's on the other side of the table too. Right? God's not just living in you and working through you, but all of us being created in the image of God. We all have that capacity to kind of reflect his image. And so it's really at the heart is kind of understanding that Jesus is living in you. And at the end of the day, he's the one that saves and he's the one that restores. Want to do a little bit of activity with you. So we're going to kind of think through some mentoring qualities. I want you to think of someone who has served as a mentor for you, okay? This could be through a program or not through a program. Doesn't matter how it happened, but just think of somebody who served as a mentor. Someone's walked you through a difficult time in your life. And just think for a second. You don't necessarily have to write this down. How is your life different because of this person? So just take a few seconds to be reflecting on that. How is your life different because of this person? Okay, and then as you continue to think, be thinking about what are the attitudes, which I think is really kind of an important word here, not just actions, but what are the attitudes or actions that made this person valuable to you? Why were they valuable? And try to identify at least 3 of these qualities. If you want to write them down, that's fine. If you want to just kind of think through them. What are the attitudes and the actions that made that person valuable to you? So just take 2 or 3 minutes and think through that. Okay, so we're going to stop right there. We need to kind of keep trucking here for a minute. But hopefully you guys have some common themes. Want to kind of move you on just for a second to think about what are the... Now, seriously, we got to move on. I'm not kidding. You guys are like, man, I ain't listening to that guy. I'm just going to keep talking. I ain't playing now. So we need to... You guys ready? Okay, we're going to move on. You guys good? Okay. So thinking about kind of the ingredients. This is on page 9 of your book. Kind of what are some of the ingredients of a good mentoring relationship? I want you guys to read through those more. hopefully what you're seeing in this material is there's way more than what we could cover in a session. So I want you to be going back and reading deeper at a later time. But really, it's this idea of growth. A mentoring relationship should really be growing. And if you're in the same place that you were when you started a year later, there might be some things that need to be looked at or considered, right? So be really thinking about growth and what that looks like and enjoying the journey of mentoring. Sometimes we get caught up in the programmatics or the logistics or whatever, and we just need to be enjoying the journey.
Okay, y'all, home stretch. You're doing good. So what are the ingredients of effective mentoring? Daniel said we would look at those, and you can look on your handout in pages 9 through 11. I love this section of the handout, and I encourage you to read it word for word when you get a moment. Just look at these 5 characteristics, these ingredients. Balance. Daniel was talking a little bit about, finding, celebrating your wins. What is finding your balance between the things that are really difficult and celebrating wins is really important. And recognizing those wins is really important as well. I'll tell you a quick story. We have a family advocate on staff who is a social worker, and her husband lays tile, and he had hired on one of our participating family's sons to work with him in his tile business. And it was huge because we were empowering this young man who really felt like he was going nowhere. And so they have her husband and this young man have formed this awesome relationship, and it's definitely been a journey. Well, one day, this young man, the mentee, I guess you would say, called Mary Beth's husband, his boss, and said, "Hey man, I'm not coming to work this afternoon. I'm cutting school and I'm going to be with my girlfriend." And Mary Beth Steve was mad. The husband, the mentor, was mad. And he was like, "Oh, I can't believe he's doing that." And Mary Beth is on the sidelines. She's like, "Yes, I'm so excited." And Steve is like, "Why are you excited?" And Mary Beth said, "Steve, he told you the truth. He told you the truth." And this was huge for him. And yes, he was making a dumb decision, but he was telling the truth. And so finding the balance between celebrating those wins and going, "Oh, that's important." And that's a part of mentoring. Be available to set boundaries. Initiate relational activities, but don't push. Encourage wise decisions and offer your input, but don't tell the mentee what to do. Hold the mentee accountable for their goals, but don't feel responsible for their choices. Support people as they pursue their goals, but relate to the mentee based on who they are, not what they achieve. Invite spiritual conversation, but don't pressure the mentee to accept Christ, pray, or read the Bible with you. And just to comment on that last one, at the Restoration House, one of our other most popular questions is, do you require your families to go to church? And our answer is a resounding no, because if we require them to go to church, that doesn't put any choice on them. And we think that is extremely empowering for them to be able to make that choice for themselves. A word about confidentiality. There is a sample confidentiality agreement there in your handout. Let me just say this, and you'll see the first statement says confidentiality is the cornerstone of a trusting relationship. Amen and amen and amen, okay? And for some of these families that you may mentor, it may be a great idea, especially if they're having a hard time uncrossing their arms. Like I said, if they're having a hard time letting their guard down, maybe they would respond better to something formal where you say, "You know what? I know that trust is a big thing with you, and I just want you to know you have my word." And maybe you sign something together. We're big at Restoration House. We do covenants together, and we sign a covenant. Each mentor signs a covenant to the mentee, and they covenant together on different things, and one of those things is confidentiality. Compatibility, we've talked a lot about that. Find finding common ground. On Monday, my kids take swim lessons at the YMCA, and on Monday, my little boy, before his swim lesson, he had hopped in the pool and was swimming around, and he saw this other little boy, and it was the cutest thing. He swam up to him and said, "Hey, buddy, we both like Pokemon. Want to be friends?" And they both had shorts or whatever on, but they immediately, kids know how to look for that common ground, and at some point we forget. We are so busy looking at differences that we forget how to look for the commonalities. And that's something that we need to do in that mentoring relationship. Instead of looking for all the ways that we are different, find the ways that you share common ground and go after those things. And there you will find your sweet spot together in a relationship. Communication is hard with the person that you've spent your life with, much less a mentor. So those key communication skills for mentors, read over those over and over and over again, especially like proactive language versus reactive language, open-ended questions, having conversation, making sure that it's not just a one-sided conversation when you're talking, and hearing the other person out, even though maybe what the other person is saying, you've already come up with something in your head that you want to respond with. I love the Stephen Covey quote. We also use it at the Restoration House. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. They are either speaking or preparing to speak. This socks me in the gut, because I'm a mama. I've got everything you need to know before you even finish your sentence, And sometimes we do that with our mentees and mentors. We've talked a lot tonight about mutuality. The goal of mentoring is mutual transformation. Mutual. The people that are up here, I have gained just as much from the relationships that I have had with our single-parent families as they could have ever gained from being with us. I'm totally blessed and moved and changed by these people. And understanding, the quicker that you can understand that you both have something to contribute. One more story about one of our families. One of our moms that lives behind us in the duplexes, she tapped on my door one day, and I was watching my kids or whatever, and I said, "Come on in." She came in. She said she was so defeated. She said, "Mandy, I'm having a terrible day. Can I clean your bathroom?" What? Who says that? But she's passionate, and she was revealing herself to me. She's passionate about cleaning. I don't know. I've never met anybody like her. But she's passionate about cleaning. It puts her in her place, and I really think it's a spiritual thing for her. And it took everything within me to say yes. It took everything in me to allow her to go in. She may as well have just taken my shoes off and washed my dirty feet. She went in there, and she spent like 3 hours cleaning my bathroom. And it was cleaner than the day we moved in with Extreme Makeover. I'm not kidding. It was unbelievable. And that made her weak. For me to allow her, to trust her, one, to reveal herself like that, to say, this is what makes me feel better. Because she's a little embarrassed about her passion because it's so unusual. And two, for me to trust her to go in to a private place in my house. And so, we have to understand that there is give and take, and that we all have something mutual to give and to receive in these relationships. The scripture in Ecclesiastes that says he makes all things beautiful in his time, and that's what he does. And it takes time, and it takes investment. We're going to skip to ingredients of effective mentoring. Minimize the risks of mentoring. Set boundaries and avoid unrealistic expectations. Let's see, where am I in my notes here? Let me move. Sorry, my iPad shut down on me. Dependent on the wireless. I encourage you to read through all the information here, especially on setting boundaries and how to avoid those really sticky situations that you'd rather not to be in, because they certainly do come up, because this is messy. Daniel, I love what he always says this when we're talking about boundaries, and he said it earlier. The great question about a boundary to ask yourself is, when in doubt, would I do this for a friend, or would a friend do this for me? And again, it's different for everyone, and I think this is an appropriate way to figure out some of your boundaries. And again, Daniel touched on this. This is messy. And this is about getting knee deep into stuff that we sometimes into situations that we never thought we were capable of being in. And one of my favorite, and Daniel said, the Holy Spirit guides us in this. God sent us a helper. We have a helper. One of my favorite quotes from an author says, "Just as surely as God wants to adore us and Jesus wants to redeem us, the Holy Spirit wants to teach us." And we have this help, capital H, this helper, this guide. And in Ezekiel 37:14 says, God promises, "I will put my spirit within you and you will come to life." And we have never felt in my family greater life than when we are knee deep in real life with real people who are messy just like we are. And there is nothing better. And God gives us his helper to walk alongside us, to guide us. I always encourage people, especially when you have a formal mentee-mentor relationship, write yourself a prayer that you're going to say before or during every interaction with your mentee. God, protect my mind, protect my heart. God, show me, guide me. Whatever those words are that he gives you, pray those and allow the Lord to guide you. We get we're so hung up on that we can do things on our own that we forget. And so I'd encourage you to make a habit of praying, maybe a certain, 2 or 3 line prayer before each interaction with your mentee or mentor. And finally, avoid unrealistic expectations. When we train our mentors with the Restoration House, we say, here's your best bet. Don't have any expectations. Just don't have any. Just don't have any. Believe that God is good. Believe that he is doing the work, and go in and jump in and be obedient. So.
I'm going to try to talk us through quickly, quicker than I did the last section. This moving into the mentoring relationship and what that looks like specifically, not specifically, but even maybe through your church and ways to do that. So you want to look on page 12, and there's some specific ways to kind of start moving into that relationship. Maybe it's with somebody that you already know, and maybe you start putting more definition on that relationship, or just acknowledging, hey, I'm in this mentoring relationship already. Maybe it's through a referral, through a church or a staff person. It doesn't always have to be through a program, and that's a really important thing to remember, is it doesn't have to be programmed. There may be reasons for it to be programmed, but it certainly doesn't have to be. Some red flags, though, that you need to be considering when you're looking into this is really understanding what your limitations are, what the limitations are of your body in terms of mentoring. And when I say the body, I mean the church in that context. One of the things that we know that we're not at the Restoration House is we're not a drug and alcohol rehab center. And so we just don't do mentoring with families who are in that space. And it's not that they don't need that, it's just not the kind of mentoring that we can do and do effectively with what we have. And so you need to know kind of what your limitations are. So some of those things may get into whether it's addictions or acute financial distress or current or recent abuse by parent or children. Those kinds of things are generally not a good idea to consider or to get yourself involved in with a one-to-one mentoring relationship, this kind of friendship with a purpose. But there are some other mentoring models that may be more effective that you can use through your church if that's something that you have available, or maybe working through another program in the community, the Restoration House or others that maybe offer up some of those other ways to jump into mentoring. Some of the things that you need to keep in mind is that mentoring really should always have an accountability component to it. That mentoring without accountability really isn't mentoring. It really is just the friendship piece. It's not really the friendship with the purpose and the kind of the movement towards something. And so even if it's not through a program and you're considering mentoring just a kid in your church or things like that, it's good to have somebody who is aware of that relationship and what the intention is in that relationship. And so maybe you're going to a pastor with that, or maybe you're going to a small group leader with that, or a really close friend of yours to say, hey, here's kind of what I'm doing in this relationship, and I want you to be aware of that and hold me accountable in that relationship. Another thing to be considering is, especially if you're not through a program who helps set some of the expectation, is setting the expectation. To have expectation. And Mandy said, don't have any expectations. What I mean when I say expectation is, how are we defining the relationship? Things like, how long is the relationship going to go if it's formal? You know, is this kind of a one-year thing, or is this longer than this? Or what are the kinds of things that we're going to do together? Or what are some of the things that we're not going to do together? Like maybe one of the things is, you know, because of the way this relationship it needs to work, we're not really going to go out of town together, right? Maybe it's not an appropriate thing for you to take that kid on a trip with you, right? And so maybe it's more locally based. And so having those kinds of conversations, and if it's with an adult, having it with that mentee and just kind of getting together and saying, okay, what's this thing going to look like, making sure you're in agreement. If it's with a kid, involving that parent in that discussion. There's probably a level to which you can have that conversation with the child, but you probably also you certainly need to be involving the parent in those parts of the conversation too. There's also another one that's mentioned here, and that's the welcome partner, a way to get kind of connected. And that's something we're going to talk a lot more about tomorrow, this kind of the idea of what a welcoming partner is. So structuring into that relationship, I talked a little bit about that, just kind of making sure that those decisions are joint. The thing that you don't want to do in a mentoring relationship is on the mentor side, call it mentoring, and on the mentee side, not call it that, not understand that that's what it is. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that both parties, and I believe that even with adult youth mentoring relationships, is helping sure that mentee appropriately knows what you're there for in their life, you know? There were things that Elwood McAllister did in my life where I knew that he was there for a reason, which gave me some confidence that he was going to be there. He wasn't going to disappear tomorrow, because I knew there was something he was there for me with, and he had that kind of conversation with me. So how do you sustain the relationship? These are on page 13 in your book. Being consistent and flexible. A really important one is keeping promises. You know, again, so many times the families that we end up working with as mentees have had promise after promise after promise broken. You know, and so don't be committing to things that you just can't fulfill. And so when you're sitting down and you're having those conversations about joint expectations and the way the thing's going to work, don't set out and say, hey, man, we're going to get together for an hour every week. Isn't that awesome? And then you're a month into it and you realize, man, that was really too much to commit to. I really can't do an hour, right? So just make sure that the promises that you set. One of the things that we've done sometimes in relationships, we talk about the minimums. We say, at the minimum, what's this relationship going to look like? It could end up looking like more than that, and that might be good. But to not break promises, we say, let's talk about the minimums. What's kind of the least that this thing is going to look like? Investing in the relationship. Relationships don't grow without investment. We have 3 time requirements at the Restoration House, and I'm not going to get into those, but what all those are about is consistency. That's all they're about. It's not about necessarily quality or what you're doing in the specific moment or anything like that. It's about a consistency of relationship. In mentoring, if they're not hearing from you except for once every other month, it's not really mentoring. There's just not the depth of investment or consistency that needs to be happening in a true mentor relationship, mentee relationship. So sustaining through investment. And then kind of continuing to learning and grow. What we're getting into tonight is just kind of touching on mentoring. There's so much more about mentoring that you can be doing your own personal study on and learning about, looking to other models, and bringing those kind of resources and ideas into your church. So Heidi's going to end us out here.
To comment too that Mandy, the scriptures that you shared, I have found so encouraging because we've talked a lot about all the requirements and the skills and things, but what's really important is to recognize that these are God-given and that it's not what's in me that makes us valuable, but it's God in me, what God has given me to share. So if you're feeling like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to make it as a mentor, if you are available to God and in a relatively stable place in your life, and are available in relationship to others, then you have the qualities to be a mentor. So, since we're all qualified to be mentors, we are going to practice a mentoring role play. So, split up into pairs, and one person, the person sitting on the left, is going to be the mentor, and the person on the right will be the mentee. And you're going to imagine that this is your first meeting, and just to make this simple, we'll make this adult to adult mentoring, not adult youth. So you don't have to pretend like you're, a sixth grader. And all we're going to do, you're going to do two things. You're going to decide together what your first meeting is going to be. So this is what you would do with a mentor. You would, in a mentee situation, you'd say, where do you want to, let's get together. What do you want to do? And then you're going to just take a quick minute to introduce yourself as if you were in this first conversation and break the ice by asking them a question and listening to the response. Okay? So, normally, if this were a real meeting, you would do this over a space of about half an hour. But we're going to pack in just a quick glimpse of what this could be like in 5 minutes. Okay? So, and let me just say that in the resource that we have online for you, the mentoring supplemental package of resources on mentoring, we have a whole page that I've taken from the Restoration House manual. Daniel said I talked about getting the best of the best resources, and one of the resources I mined was their manual. So in that resource online, it has a whole page of suggestions of things you could do at your first meeting and questions you could ask. So here's a couple of them, just to get you started. All right, so 5 minutes, role play, and go. All right, so now that you've had this mini mentoring experience, we are going to close out our time together. Oops. We're going to do two things. Here's how we're going to close things out. We're just going to spend a couple minutes just processing this role play. And then at the conclusion of our teaching time, we are going to invite you to stay for two things. One is going to be a commissioning service for the Knoxville Single Parent Ministry Roundtable. A short commissioning prayer time. And also we're inviting you to stay for an explanation of Dropbox, which is the file sharing online system we're using to deliver extra resources to you. So we're going to talk, just go through these questions, and then 9 o'clock, invite you to stay for the commissioning prayer and the Dropbox discussion. But I want to ask, so just a couple of you call out, what was the most difficult part of this for you as a mentor, if you were the mentor? Anybody want to share? So you had a negative experience as a mentor, and then trying it again, it would be hard. That would be challenging. Yeah. Oh. Well, that's why God gives us next times. Anything else that you found challenging about the role play if you were a mentor? So everybody was good with this? Not really. Oh, I knew it. What was challenging?
I've never done this before. Just getting to the next one.
Mm.
You don't want to rush in with finding out about the person.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take care of them.
Right. Mm-hmm. The flow. And that's why it's helpful to go in with kind of a little plan for yourself. I'm going to talk about this. Here's how I'm going to introduce myself. Then I'm going to ask this, and then I'm going to ask that. And that's just a fallback plan because you don't want to stick to it as a script, but you want to be responsive to whatever they give to you. But just so you feel comfortable, if there's a space in the conversation, you're feeling uncomfortable, this is what I'll say next. Mentees, let me ask you to describe your experience, just a couple of you to say, what was something that your mentor did that helped you feel comfortable, or maybe something they did that was a little off-putting, because this is a learning experience, so we're okay to share this. Mentees? Who was the mentor here? Well, let me just say that. That's a very good point, because if you as a mentor are not comfortable, your mentee will sense that. So go in with confidence and just say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make me comfortable, and that's going to make the other person feel comfortable too. Okay? Good. Yeah.
I was going to point out what he was saying about the next question. One of the things in counseling that I've learned is when I'm having a hard time coming up with the next question, it's usually an indicator that I'm not listening.
Ooh, good point. If you're having a hard time coming up with the next question, it's an indicator that I'm not listening well, because there should be something in what they've said that would trigger a response. So, yeah, what we don't want to be doing is thinking, okay, what did I think was going to be next? What about my plan? Right, you want to be available to that person. So, great point. For either mentee or, yeah.
One thing I might add that I've experienced in dealing with situations is take a moment. Let's say, for example, you're going to speak to this mentor. Before you get out of your car, stop and pray. Take a few minutes to turn it over to God.
That's right.
Don't try to go in there on your own.
Right. And that's what, we should have started the role play with a prayer. And I just, Mandy, pray. Start your mentoring experience with prayer, as Mandy talked about. And the prayer that I pray is just, oh, Lord, be present through me. Just be here. And that way I know that even if I don't know what to say, it's okay, because Jesus is present and God is working. What helped you build a sense of connection? Anybody have a connection that just really worked? And what helped to build that?
Well, I know what I like to do. So, as I was started asking her, what is it that she may want to do as we think about what we could meet. I like to do spoken word and poetry, so I asked her if she liked to do that. And then so she would say, well, she said no, she don't really know what it is. Then she said, one thing that I am familiar with is quotes. So when she said that, I said, well, what's your favorite quote? So, and so that we got her
That's
to
some
tell
good.
me what her favorite quote was, which is almost the same thing as spoken word and poetry.
Yeah.
So, so
You found, and it wasn't exactly the same thing, but you found some common ground.
being able to,
It's great.
I guess, express something that makes you feel, using words to express how you feel. Whether I may use poetry to do it, but she can take a quote that she can relate to.
That's right.
And do it in that.
And the important thing in what you said, one of the important things is that you didn't say, oh, well, I don't know what that is. You asked about it, you learned something from each other, and you found that one point where you could come together, even though there's areas where you don't connect, you focused on the places where you had some common ground. And that's, and there's some energy that was sparked there. Maybe some of you enjoyed this so much that you want to get together afterwards. What did you learn? Give me a couple. Let's just share a couple learning points. What did you learn from this role play, or something you're going to take from tonight that's going to help you as you look at beginning a mentoring? What are some key learnings that you'd like to share? Focus on building the relationship. Stop trying to fix people, because it isn't going to work anyway. Yeah. Enjoy. This is a person that God has put on this earth, and you have a relationship with them, it's not an accident. That's right. God has brought you together in a relationship. Enjoy it. Okay. Anything else? Sure. Well, we have had a lot of food for thought, and I'm just so thankful to the Watsons for sharing their expertise with us. And like we said, this is just the Kickstarter. If you want to learn more about team mentoring, then follow up with that. If you're interested in mentoring with youth, then we recommend that you use some of the resources and programs and curriculum that's available for that. And in the resource guide, there is a page of resources on mentoring. So there's a lot that you can read and follow up, websites you can visit, program models to explore. So I encourage you to look through the resources we provided, talk to other people. If you've had a mentor in your life, maybe call them or write them a note and say thank you. I thank God for what you've done in my life, and pray for me now as I go to mentor others. So thank you. And at this point, we are going to invite Andy to come up to lead the prayer service of commissioning for single parent roundtable.